Assalamu alaikum, good evening, and a very warm welcome from cold London. Here we are on a fine winter evening with a very distinguished guest, Saif Osmani. He is a special designer, visual artist with a practice that overlaps fine art, architecture, interiors, photography, and written text. Saif Osmani creates paintings and drawings. He is based on identity, formation, and cultural codes of communication. If that has sailed over heads of many people, he is here to explain what it all means. Here you are. Welcome to the show, Saif. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for inviting me here. It's very nice to be here.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure for all of us that you have given us time. And it's been a long time. I think I interviewed you last, about 6 years ago?
6 years ago, yeah.
And we have all grown older and wiser since then.
Like that.
Now, what would you like to say about yourself to our viewers, because they must have forgotten in 6 years when they saw you last time?
Well, that was a good introduction. My arts practice it overlaps art and architecture essentially. I recently completed my master's in architecture and historic urban environments at UCL Bartlett, and through that I mainly have a socially engaged arts practice, which means I go into communities and look at some of the issues that are coming up, how we can interpret it in a creative way as well, and also look at social change through it as well.
When you say some of the problems that come up in the community, what kind of problems? There are so many problems in the community, but what kind of problems an architect can help solve? Well,
spatial injustice, for example, or spatial inequality is a real issue facing a lot of communities here in East London, where I'm based as well. But across the globe, I think there's communities which feel that when the city expands, that they feel hard done by, or they feel less part of it. And some of the projects I'm working on at the moment, they address that either through housing or looking at co-production as a method of co-designing and co-creating with communities.
You have been working on many projects, and in August 2023, I think these are 3 projects that you have listed. The Street Markets Conference, what was it about?
It was called Learning from East End Street Markets, and there's a lot of learnings there because...
When you say street markets, these are the ones that come up every Sunday or every week on pavements, blocking the way.
Blocking the way for some, but creating opportunity for others, I think. Street markets are really vital for Bangladeshi community. If you go to Whitechapel, Upton Park's Queen's Market, to Watney Market in Shadwell, they're part and parcel of how we interact as a community. We break barriers between different communities, and also we're sharing food, and food knowledge itself is really, really vital to ourselves for our health and well-being, and also understanding ourselves and what we need is often connected to food as well. So there's more complexity there. It's not just apples and pears.
But these are not permanent shops. I see they have to be dismantled every evening, set up every morning, as you see. And the amount of time and the labor that goes into it is immense.
Absolutely.
Have you done any study on that?
Well, this is it. We've done some studies a few years ago with Leeds University, their geography department, which specifically looked at the community value of street markets. That markets aren't just places where you just go and buy something, but the community come together. And we found that a huge amount of South Asians and Afro-Caribbeans and ethnic minorities come to street markets of different kinds, from Brixton to Ridley Road Market in Dalston, Queen's Market in Upton Park, or Whitechapel Market, for different experiences. It's not just Bangladeshi people like to go to Bangladeshi ones, but they like to see Indian ones, African ones as well.
They attract a lot of people from outside this country because they have heard about it, they have read about it, so they want to go to Portobello Market and they want to go to Covent Garden
Yep, there's a hierarchy of markets as well. So what you've got is tourist markets, and you've also got different retail centres. So where you've got shopping centres at one end, you might have street markets at the other. And it's not always been the case. You know, you've sometimes had shopping malls, you've had the high street itself, the shops itself. And for some reason, the street markets get a hard time, but actually they've all come from the street market experience. That it's just a case of people selling. If you're a vendor, you're selling something and a good, or you're bartering on the street, and often shops have started like that. And as a nation of shopkeepers, I'm sure that's something worth exploring. So we do that. We help save and put street markets on the agenda for policymakers.
Or the things are generally cheaper, so they must not be making a lot of profit, but then their overheads are low, isn't it?
The overheads are low, but there's a lot of competition. And also by being cheap, I think that attracts people as well, because in a lot of ethnic minority communities, they have come from countries where they have very good quality, cheap, affordable food that they sometimes can even go to the market and eat there as well. So if you're used to that culinary experience, I think it's really shifting and changing how we're eating things in England as well. You know, once upon a time you'd just go to a curry house to eat, but now you can get curry down the street through vendors just out of a small window on the high street. And I think it's an exciting time as well. There's much more intermixing and fusion coming up.
I think street food has been there for a long, long time. I mean, it's part of our traditions and culture, see. But I was in Dhaka recently, and the outskirts of Dhaka, in Dhaka, wherever you find, I mean, if there's a place to sit, there is a place to eat. Yeah. Even on the pavements, even on the islands, the dividers between the two sections of the road, they're selling any kind of food, and there are people sitting there and eating it. And even at late nights, and I cannot understand who are these people who have come out of their houses to enjoy this food, you see, because we seem to be scared because it might be carrying this or that disease or something like that. But those people are very happy, getting along with their life and enjoying the food, you see. How do you really handle that barrier, that fear that street food is not clean enough?
Well, street markets, like their very nature, I think, attract a particular, sometimes negative perception. And as we shop and eat differently, we kind of look down on them sometimes, which I think is a bit unfair, because I think really the hygiene standards are still very high. If you look at the meat bought at, for example, Queen's Market or Watney Market, it's actually very good quality meat. And also because of the turnover of food as well, what you're finding is that
it's fresh.
It's fresh, and so people can come here, and also it's a social space. Don't forget, you'll get to meet people. Whereas nowadays, when you're in a shopping supermarket, you'll have a computer telling you thank you very much, but you don't have the interaction.
Put the bag on the other side.
So you'll have to pay for a bag, whereas at the street market you don't necessarily have to pay. And also it's part of culture. I think there's a market culture. If you look at, for example, the old East End, you've got also the Bangladeshi fish culture as well, and the vegetables are just starting to make the mainstream right now.
But was your study focused on East London or the whole of London?
Well, in 2019 we did the Future of London Street Markets conference, and that was in Brixton, and that was quite well resourced by a really good umbrella group called Just Space Network, which looks at planning issues that affect communities in particular. And here, fast forward in 2023, in August this year, we did our conference was called Learning from East End Street Markets. So the focus was different, and one of the reasons is the East End in London is seeing a huge amount of changes, and sometimes they're really impacting on people and particular communities disproportionately. And street markets are one of those places where I know for a fact a lot of people find inspiration in, and they go there and they meet people, and nothing's trying to necessarily sell anything, but you just kind of watch people go by and life go by, and like you described the street vendor, what you're actually experiencing is life just unrolling on the streets. And I think very much that kind of lifestyle feels increasingly under threat.
This, I mean, coming back to our East London, there's a predominant this street market on our in Whitechapel, you see. As I said before, you see, people do have problems in walking and passing through, see. But then there are shops, permanent shops that are there. And have you done any study, anybody has done any study, that these street markets that prop up every morning and disappear after six days, I think, not on Sundays, probably there's holiday or something. So do they affect the economy, of the total economy of that area?
Absolutely. I mean, they're vital. I mean, if you look at Whitechapel Market, it's a vital street market for that community there and for those communities. And there is an interaction between the stalls and the shops, because often when you're starting off as a small business, what's great about markets is they just allow you a space just to sell things. And even if it's corn dogs or whatever it is people are selling, I saw the other day that they were selling corn dogs in Whitechapel Market. But also there's a window which sells for everything from jalebi to shingaras and everything, and they're fresh.
Even fish.
Fish, and also it's also knowing about the fish. You know, if you go back 5-10 years ago, those fish weren't necessarily here, and they're not so fresh either. Now you've got fresh fish coming, you've got frozen fish coming as well, and it's changing the landscape. People are saying, well, I don't want just, you know, cod, I want different types of fish. And I think Bangladesh, and Bangladeshi fish in particular, has got a monopoly in that. And I'm kind of excited about that. And I constantly take friends to that area to experience Bangladeshi culture when they're eating.
Has any study been made about their contribution to the economy?
That would be worth doing. I always encourage students to do that.
Are they taxed? Is their income taxed?
Well, they would be taxed, but not so much. I think street traders are
exempt.
A little bit exempt, and also they're you know, it's quite a low price and a low threshold when they come into the job market. But eventually, if they expand to do a bigger business,
but officially, any service, any sale involves value-added tax. See, so probably they may be exempt for a number of years.
We'll have to change local policy on that one. But yeah.
Does it involve the local government of the area?
Yeah. So we invited local government people, and we met them beforehand as well, and they were very positive towards it, because I think there's a misunderstanding around street markets and indoor markets and pop-up markets, the new markets, the food markets. So we're seeing expansion of those, but there is actually an underlying community markets which community go to, because we have a strong home culture where people are eating and cooking very good quality food at home, hopefully, and that's part of our well-being. And I think this is why markets on the agenda is really important. So they saw that and they valued it. So when we do the report coming up early next year, is that we'll be able to share that information, that knowledge.
Is there a quality control about food, particularly because, again, going back to that, it can spread diseases, it can cause pandemics.
It can, but my example is completely true, but the 3 times I had meat go bad was actually from a supermarket, which is from the halal section. So I reverted back to the local street market for that. I do think sometimes people see that. They do see a lot more sort of grime sometimes, which also gave rise to grime culture and grime music. But there's a bit of grime there in markets because it's everydayness. It's about realizing that life isn't just all about the nitty-gritty curatedness of things, but is also, you know, interaction is also sometimes a little bit dirty at times. But I mean, there are rules in place. The market vendors will have to follow strict protocol on things. Maybe not as much as Canada, I'm told, but they're pretty important, and they're there, and they're there for good reason. But I still tell everyone to wash their apples and pears before eating.
Does the council allow them to work for, say, do business from, say, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. or something like that, and the council is aware of who is doing what? There is a control.
There's control. there's also control of who works on stalls and so forth. So, I mean, the great thing about it is you don't necessarily need a CV to work at a street market. And I think that's a good thing as well, because I hear 4 students telling me how they've printed 30 CVs and they've emailed and no one's got back. And I keep saying, well, why don't you go and look at a different way of kind of getting a job? I'm not saying that they should all be barrow boys and street hawkers, but I do think it gives a large section of our community opportunity.
Well, you have mentioned somewhere that about the rising rents, you see, and that is causing people to go to the street markets and start smaller businesses, see.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the economy, the rising rents, the cost of the price goes up, so the street markets are more affordable, more approachable, and probably by that, being that, they'll be able to raise more money and make more money and have better business.
Yeah, I mean, right now the pandemic has shown that street markets are again vital and a key cornerstone to how we eat and access to food, because you can't really feed a family from a supermarket. I mean, some people probably can, but people also find that the fruit and veg is very different. It tastes different as well. So and I think there is a difference in how different cultures and different dishes might determine what is ripe as well. So there's a ripeness to what how they eat. For example, somebody we interviewed last year said that they shop for spinach, particularly from the street market, because supermarket spinach isn't good enough. And I agree, because the supermarket spinach is often for salads and things. It's not necessarily for sag or sagalu and things like that. So I think there's when you're used to that culinary experience, you do go there. And the good thing is still very affordable at the moment. And also street market vendors are seeing their rents go up at the same time as well, so and that's going to be passed on to the shoppers.
You're not talking about homegrown lau.
Homegrown laus can be sold at markets.
Yes.
People sell them. People sell them. So if you go to Queen's Market in Upton Park, for example, you'll see the different types of flat beans and lau and all of that. And actually, I'm told that they also help businesses in Essex where there's people are growing fresh, local produce.
Right. We move to Save the Brick Lane campaign. I hope that it's not falling apart, but
so do we, yeah.
What motivates people to save Brick Lane campaign? What is it, this campaign?
So Brick Lane, as you know, is an iconic street or lane actually, although it's treated a little bit like a high street, and it's extremely successful.
Can we have that short video about Brick Lane, Bangla town? Yeah. Oh, great. Very interesting. I didn't see any person around.
So I took those during the global lockdown, because I just done my master's looking at Bangla town in particular and what makes it culturally distinct, and especially the architectural side, because a lot of people think that the Bangladeshi culture is just a surface thing, or the curry houses will somehow move on, but actually they're part and parcel of the fabric and the social fabric and architecture of the area. So I wanted to capture that. So I did that, I think, with 132 photographs, mainly during the lockdown, so there weren't very many people. But what's good about taking photographs of buildings is it's good when there's not many people there.
Okay, we are nearly about the end of our first segment, so we'll take a break here, and when we come back, we will definitely like to hear more about Brick Lane and what is the campaign about saving Brick Lane. Thank you, viewers, for being with us, and we'll be back soon after this very short break. Thank you. Welcome back. Just before the break, we were talking to our guest today, Saif Usmani, an architect, an artist, and campaigner for many of the things that we are talking about. Saving the Brick Lane. There was a campaign, and I was asking him what made him go on this project. Was there anything wrong with Brick Lane? I usually go every week and I didn't see anything wrong. So what was it that was to be saved?
Well, what you're seeing is Brick Lane is changing a lot.
Yep.
It's changing because there's an intense...
It was saving the history, saving the original culture.
Absolutely, and also the Bangladeshi, Bengali, South Asian culture is very important, and especially post-war, it was the Bangladeshis being in that area was really, really important, because everything was kind of dying, people were moving out, and the change in fortune of the East End, especially around that area, was attributed to the Bangladeshis in particular, because they were having large families. So as a result,
they had to
things were changing, and so the curry houses were really part and parcel of that movement. And at one point, you know, people would go from the city to have a curry down Brick Lane, and it was seen as a bit of a cultural thing to do as well, and it had a huge impact across the country, I would say, because other places wanted to become the curry king or curry capital or curry city, and they couldn't. And in fact, Brick Lane was doing that for London. And what we found was, during lockdown, there was increasing misinformation in a way about Bangladeshis moving out of the area. And what we found was that, in fact, the real culprit here was gentrification. So it was the influx of new people, often wealthier people of a different background, and they were creating their own enclaves, which didn't necessarily correspond with or allow existing communities in. And by existing communities, not just the Bangladeshi community, obviously you have the Somalis there, you have particular working class groups which are also seeing their cultural centres and community centres being squeezed. And also, when you look at it economically, because we were talking about that a bit earlier, is that there's less opportunity for people as a result, because it's unaffordable. So you've got sites like the Truman Brewery, and also Bishopsgate Goods Yard, which are 10-acre sites, which are not necessarily considering housing for local people. So housing became a really, really big issue. So you're talking about architecture. It is an architectural interest, but also, how do we as Bangladeshis and ethnic minorities, how do we really want to live? Are we really asked those questions, and how do we platform what we need as we go forward, and do the local economy, does it really help us? And so the Save Brick Lane really came from that, and also seeing that 80, once at its height, 80 curry houses had dwindled down to 30. During the lockdown, it was presumed that more will close, but they didn't. So it obviously shows there's a resilience within the Bangladeshi community to keep the curry houses.
But isn't that because Brick Lane is so close to the city? Yes. And the impact, see, of the property market, see, the land price is going up, see, and you can't resist the temptation of the, what do you call them, the pirates of land. They will not encroach upon Brick Lane.
Exactly. I mean, I think Brick Lane is a very successful lane, and sometimes it's treated a bit like a high street. And I think what we found was because the Bangladeshis were largely ignored out of the planning system, that we had to do that through campaigning to highlight the issue that we're being ignored in the planning system. And it's not just us. We also found that Afro-Caribbean people were being ignored in Brixton, for example. South American people were being ignored in Elephant and Castle and Seven Sisters. And so across London, we say we're a global city, but here we are squeezing the very globalness and all these communities in a hard way. So for Bangladeshis, they were really, still are very important for the local economy there. I mean, and it's a community space, and increasingly where gentrification pushes people out, often they don't have a connection to the local people. So it's questionable whether that revenue is actually coming back and helping the community as well, or is the revenue going out of the community?
But isn't that a natural process? I mean, people are not necessarily tightening their screws for the local community, but because that is that's what happens. See, things change over the years. See, like the property market has gone up in London, like anything. See, and areas that were once not considered good enough are considered. They have been gentrified. See, there are people like solicitors and bankers, and they go and live there, and they would like to live there. And new housing have come up, new schools have come up in those areas, some areas of South London, I know. And if you go on and walk on the streets, you see different styles of cars are there. That reflects the affluence of the people who are living there. So it is bound to change.
Change is inevitable, you're right, and globalization has done that. I mean, since the 70s, we've opened up the economy to lots of money coming in at different scales, and now everything's going digital as well. But there are winners and losers in every game, and we didn't want the Bangladeshis to be the losers when they were so instrumental for the area to come up, really. And we had, obviously, Banglatown, which is the first Banglatown in the Western Hemisphere. Since then, there's been ones in New York and across the States, but that was also quite an important step in and acknowledgement of Bangladeshi presence in that area. So we had to fight it, really. Yeah.
No, in New York, so there's an area called Jackson Heights. See?
That's it, yeah.
And it is, if you walk along, it's as if you are somewhere in Old Dhaka.
Well, this is it. When people adjust and come to London, they sometimes go to Brick Lane. They feel like there isn't much difference, and I think that's a good thing. I think it shows that the testament of what we do in London particularly well, which is we are an international city, and with the changes happening, whether they decide to, for example, go high-rise in that area, will have an impact as well. You know, people will be affected by the lack of vitamin D, for example, access to natural light, sunlight and daylight is going to have an impact on people.
Parking spaces.
Parking spaces for the curry houses is very important as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's very important. Yes. Now, we get Tower Hamlets to recognize Cockney as a community language. And earlier in the year, the report was released, and we have this report. Can we?
Yeah. So this is fresh off the press.
Yes.
It's,
great. Can we focus on this research done by a committee?
With Warwick University, they did a lot of the studies.
That is about Cockney in East London. Cockney is home. East London is home of Cockney, isn't it?
East London is the home of Cockney, and what we have here is a report which highlights actually the diversity within Cockney itself. If you see here, there's a local youth worker here in a niqab with pearlies around her, and everybody will know that those pearls are part of the costume or the dress.
Pearly Kings.
Worn by the pearly kings and queens of England, and what you find is that there was a misconception that Cockney wasn't diverse, and in a way being cornered into the far right, a racist bloke kind of persona. But what we found was that Cockney, and as with other languages in the East End, was actually being ignored a little bit. And so Cockney, we really want to see that the local borough and the boroughs not just in East London but South London as well, where there's strong Cockney links, recognise Cockney as an indigenous language as well, but also very important as a community language and as a culture, as a cultural heritage of the area. So this is fresh off the press by the University of Warwick, and I wanted to hand it to you because I know that you did your Masters in Linguistics.
Thank you very much. I'll treasure it. This is the first book ever or research on Cockney that I've come across. Are there within the Cockney speakers, that community, is there any movement to save the language?
Well, if you go by...
Would we call it a language? Because it has to have a literature, it has to have a speakers, it has to have a geographical area where it is spoken.
And the geography area, some researchers have said that it's determined by the number of pie and mash shops. So the pie and mash shop seems to be doing very well in Essex at the moment, but they seem to be struggling a little bit in the East End, and we want to really kind of revive that in a way. But there's a strong Cockney link. A lot of Cockneys have moved out of the East End, but some have remained, and I think we need to kind of strengthen those as well, because those communities are the indigenous community, and also they're part and parcel of where Bangladeshis are living at the moment in areas like Tower Hamlets. Also Hackney, the Hackney MP has said she also backs, Diane Abbott said that she backs the campaign as well. So I think there's goodwill there, you know, from different people, different cultural backgrounds. But Cockney is a language because it's the vernacular that people used to speak with for a long time, and it's got a 600-year history here in London. Not just in London, but you've got it in the older books. Cockney is mentioned, and so it's a strong culture. It's misunderstood, definitely. It's had a bit of its bad day, but we think there's a positive, good day coming up for Cockney. Next year, we'll be holding the Modern Cockney Festival 2024 as well. And
who would be the participants?
So we've got Whitechapel Gallery interested. We've got Museum of London interested. Last year we held our main event at Museum of London as well. Toynbee Hall last year as well. So I think there's lots of goodwill that people are saying, well, actually there is a localized culture as well, and are we going to acknowledge it in an increasingly globalized city? I think it's really worthwhile to do that. Yeah.
Okay, we'll be taking a break now, and then when we come back we will have other things on the board, and I do not know how to express please wait for the third segment, but in Cockney, what would you say?
In Cockney, you'd say, see you in a bit.
Welcome back. We were talking about Cockney, and as I said before, and I've read earlier, that any set of communications to be called language, or to claim to be a language, it has to have a form of a script, speakers, literature, and a geographical area where it is spoken. There are so many languages in the world, but they are not spoken today. The economic usefulness of that particular language is gone, and so nobody wants to learn. If we thought of why people want to learn English, because this is the lingua franca, everybody speaks and it is spoken everywhere. Now Cockney is a kind of a language that is very localized in East London, and also you said in South London.
Yeah, so the general belief is that the Bow Bells, which is now based in St. Paul's actually, because the East End used to stretch from that point onwards. Now the Bow Bells, where the bell rings, if you were born within the ringing of the Bow Bell, then you were considered a Cockney. So I would be considered a Cockney. So I remember the moment where my dad said he's not a Cockney, he was born in Bangladesh, but he was very happy to see that his sons were Cockneys.
He's Cockney by conviction.
So you can adopt Cockney culture, obviously. Then sometimes there's also terms like Mockney, Poshney, and these things are when you start to move out and interact with other groups.
What is Mockney? I understand Poshney.
Mockney is where people adopt it, although they've moved out of the East End. So, for example, somebody in Stoke Newington might kind of adopt a persona that they're more Cockney than they are.
Does it have a script?
Cockney, it does have a language that's different though. So it has particular terms, as we know. There's Cockney rhyming slang, so there'll be different words for stairs is, I've used this a few times, apples and pears. Dustbin lids means kids and things like that. So there's a different language which is a different set of words which you could put a dictionary together.
Can we really call it a language?
I think you can, because it's a very unique, different form of communication, which was predominant for over 600 years. For Londoners, for a large part of Londoners, that would have been their way of communicating, and it's not necessarily that other part of London would have understood that way of communicating. So it's a particular language which in that geographic, the eastward trend of London.
Is there any literature?
There's a lot of literature. So we found that working class poetry, literature, has a lot of Cockney in it, and also reference to particular Cockney writers as well, and also playwrights. If you look at theatre, there's lots of playhouses which will have Cockney characters or working class characters.
The main characteristic of Cockney communication is that it rhymes. So I was about to ask you about does Cockney have some poets?
That's so it. There is.
It would be, if they're rhyming things, that must be poetry.
There is poetry, but I mean, again, we were talking about markets earlier. Markets are really intrinsic to that, to Cockney culture, because the costermonger who used to come up and sell his goods at the market,
he would rhyme.
He would rhyme, so people were attracted to the sound, the vocal sounds coming from the market, and then that will get people going, and also people interact with that, and that really, it's part of the trade of London. And for even sailors or people who'd come from South Asia, they would have in the early days interacted with a lot of Cockney people, because it was a way in, it was a language which wasn't necessarily prejudicial. No. It would allow people in on a kind of everydayness and everyday language. So it's a pretty important language,
Would you call it a street language or a poor man's language or an ordinary person's language? Because there's no snobbery attached to it. It's not a posh accent or something.
It's not a posh accent. Some people do wrongly call it an accent. I think it's more than an accent, in fact. What you do find is that people do attach themselves to Cockney for various different reasons, because they like a persona, and you find that in mainstream media that there is a persona, but there's a seriousness as well, because some people do actually identify as Cockney themselves within particular settings of, for example, in Bow or Bethnal Green. And for them, that language is still very much prevalent within that community, and that's their main way of communicating. There is obviously linguistic prejudice, which we see a lot of in London as well. The other thing I wanted to mention was that multicultural London English, which is often a lot of linguists think that that's overtaken Cockney, is a different thing. It's a different trajectory. We're talking about multicultural London English to take on African sounds and words and so forth as well, which is different to Cockney, which has its own trajectory.
Its Cockney campaign, what the findings? Did you find out that the response that you get from the government or the local government, what sort of response do you get from them?
It was positive. In the summer, we got Tower Hamlets Council to recognise Cockney as a community language. They openly recognised that it has a unique place within a particular setting of the East End, and Tower Hamlets was the heart of it, or people thought it was the heart of it. So how you now go forward and define that and what you do with it is going to be interesting. Simultaneously, they're also bringing back the Bengali language provision in the area. So it could be an interesting time where we start to look at linguistic diversity within particular very mixed areas.
You don't have Sylheti language on board?
Not quite. Obviously, I did a exhibition 7 years ago, 6-7 years ago, called on Sylheti Nagri. So Amnazaga was one of them, and but we, yeah, Sylheti's seen a different kind of revival in its own right, really. A lot more people are claiming it. The School of Oriental and African Studies is doing classes on it. And we're seeing that new generations of people are saying, well, actually, I'm Bengali, but I'm also Sylheti as well. So just as much as you're British Bengali, you know, we take English very easily. We should also be able to show that we have, you know, many languages.
Yeah, we have so many caps, like Sufis.
Really.
You have also been involved with the Muslin Trust. This is muslin, the material, the fabric. And what is muslin?
Muslin is a very fine cotton, and a particular grade of cotton which came from the Arboreum neglecta, which died out. So far, people have not really been able to find that original seed. But the reason was it was 400, you could get a 400 count of very fine cotton, which was then the preferred type of fine cotton for the Mughal courts. And that's that particular grade they traded with.
Yeah, and they have specimens of those at Victoria and Albert Museum. I was lucky enough to be invited with a group of ladies who were admiring it most, and I was taking pictures of the muslin.
Well, muslin, yeah, so muslins, there's a lot of muslins in the V&A archive, as you've seen, yeah.
There's a lot of work going on about muslin, and Muslin Trust is very active. Now, can this traditional fabric be revived? Can it be produced again? And I was shown in this studio by one of your colleagues a sari that would probably cost more than 50,000 pounds or something. And but who's going to buy it?
Well, exactly. I mean, it's a luxury material. It always has been, and it took China's silk trade for a run, really, when muslin fine cottons was being produced predominantly in South Asia, and obviously Dhaka muslin was seen as the height of it and the most important one. So 10 years ago we did come up with the Muslin Trust, which back then, if you ever searched online for muslin, and it used to say, do you mean Muslim? But now if you search for muslin,
I've been doing that too.
You get a lot of different types of muslins, from mulmul, different types of cottons, jamdani, pattern muslin. And what's amazing about this particular weave of fine cottons is that the communities in Bangladesh who weave it have been doing it for a very long time, and they keep the design in their minds, and they have it within their memory, and they pass that through different generations.
Both muslin and jamdani, I always say that the king of fabrics and fabric for the king, but how can we make them, bring them down to earth and make them available for common people?
Well, we can start to design and collaborate together, I think, look at modern sort of contemporary fashion and design to incorporate a lot of those patterns in particular. Last year, we lost Ruby Ghuznavi, who was a leading expert in Bangladesh on natural dyes, but also was advising us on muslin as well from Bangladesh. But she'd written a book about jamdani patterns, and those patterns that I said were in the minds of the weavers are now in a book. And that is really precious, because now you can actually take those and start to interpret those as cultural codes or significance, and say this is particularly attributable to.
How are these expert weavers passing on this knowledge to the younger ones? They're from the same family?
Usually from the same family. When I went to the weaving villages in Dhaka or just outside, we found that the setup was very much village orientated, and you had a few weaving looms inside the village setup. And a father, for example, will pass it down to his son and teach him as they're on the weave as well. So there's weaving families there.
And the design was in their mind.
So the designs are passed on. So Ruby was a big advocate to continue the patterns down to the different, to the next generation, see how can we look at them in a new way.
Saif, we have come to the end of the program. It was a pleasure.
Very nice to meet you.
Hosting you.
Thank you very much.
Happy hunting, happy researches and projects, and inshallah we'll meet again someday. Thank you very much for being with us and enjoying the show. I hope see you again same time in a few weeks' time. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all.